1942. Battle of the Philippines. A man stalks the jungle alone, perfectly silent. He points his gun at the back of unsuspecting Japanese soldiers. One burst and they'll all be dead. It's one of the darkest hours of the Pacific War. Japanese Imperial soldiers advance, about to achieve their greatest victory to date against the American forces in the Bataan Peninsula. Some of them, though, are terrified. There is a ghost in the jungle. A one-man army named Arthur William Wormuth. A cowboy with a temper. Born in 1915, son of a World War I veteran, Arthur Wormuth was a cowboy at heart, a tough, old-fashioned boy growing into a man hardened by heavy physical labor. Before being known by his enemies as the Ghost of Bataan, he was helping out his family ranch in South Dakota and studying at Northwestern Military and Naval Academy. With lackluster academic results, Arthur made up for his underwhelming school performance with his athleticism. He played football, baseball, and every other sport available, all with noteworthy results. He was known on the football field as an aggressive player, tough, with the resilience of a man who doesn't know when to quit. As long as he was standing, after all, he could find the opportunity he needed. Quickly, Arthur gained a reputation not only as an asset for any sport team, but as a rough and tumble kind of guy, ready to spring into action and join a fisticuff if he felt it was the right thing to do. He had an old-fashioned Dutch temper and knew how to throw a punch, a combination that caused him to abandon better prospects and settle for the Reserve Officer Training Corps. He was tall, strong, and certainly did not have the look of the classic American hero. Arthur's war began early, before the US even entered World War II. He requested to be sent into the Philippines himself in order to help train the local forces, and was deployed as early as January 1941. After Pearl Harbor, in the desperate need of capable officers, he was promoted to captain. The months spent training local soldiers proved to be a key factor of Wormuth's military success, as while he was giving them access to modern military tactics, they were in turn training him, teaching him how war was waged in the land of hills and jungle. The relationship he developed with the soldiers he trained and the respect he gained by learning the secrets of their land would become one of his best weapons in the coming battle and make him unique among the American troops stationed in the Philippines. The Battle of Bataan. On the 10th and 12th of December 1941, just a few days after the Pearl Harbor attack, Japanese forces made landfall in the Philippines. The loss of the Pacific Fleet meant that the US and Filipino forces were cut off from any continuous form of supply, forced to make do with what they had. Under the rising pressure of Japanese air superiority, Arthur Wormuth was immediately assigned to a regiment populated by the same men he spent the last few months training. The 57th Infantry Regiment of the Philippine Scouts counted few Americans, but he had earned his spot among the local fighters and was going to make sure they'd leave their mark in history. They'd teach the Japanese the meaning of fear. Right before hostilities began, Wormuth took 185 of his best soldiers, all infiltration specialists, and formed a special unit called the Suicide Snipers. This group reflected Arthur Wormuth's approach to war, tasked with the job of finding, hunting, and killing Japanese snipers. The Suicide Snipers quickly gained a remarkable reputation, amassing an impressive 500 confirmed kills, considered a conservative estimate of the damage they really did to their enemy. This unit was also one of the best at countering Japanese infiltration maneuvers, a remarkable achievement considering the Imperial Army was known for their expertise at these kind of tactics. Their actions proved Wormuth's ability not only as a soldier, but as a commanding officer as well. Weapons, ammo, and equipment wasn't too much of a problem for the Allied forces. Standard US operating procedure was to oversupply their forces at the beginning of their campaign. But rations were a different story. The moment the Japanese fleet surrounded the island, a countdown started. In 6 months, as implied by General MacArthur, they would be forced to surrender. Fighting erupted along a slowly retreating line, with the Japanese pushing hard and the Allied forces trying to find a defensible line to hold them back. Hope for the fleet to come rescue them was slim, especially after the Pearl Harbor disaster, and morale was low. As the days passed by, the Japanese assault progressed, threatening a breakthrough. The Japanese general, Homer, was trying to envelop pockets of Allied resistance. On January 9, 1942, the American top brass determined there was only one way to stop Homer in his tracks and give themselves time to regroup. A bridge, only one still serviceable in the area, had to be destroyed. Suicide mission. There was a problem. The target was already in enemy hands. While General Homer's aggressive, fast advance meant the bridge was only guarded by the vanguard, it was only a matter of hours before the bulk of their forces would arrive, making the target impossible to hit. It is in this context that Wehrmath first began showing his particular skills for guerrilla fighting. When others saw the situation as desperate, he chose to bring the fight to the enemy in a way they would not expect. Wehrmath seized on the opportunity to retaliate and volunteered for what was considered a suicide mission. A plan was concocted. Arthur would sneak into the occupied village surrounding the bridge with 2 canisters of 5 gallons of gasoline each and a TNT charge in his hands. He would use the gasoline to burn the village and use it as a smoke signal, a targeting tool for the Filipino artillery. The big guns would open fire and blast the village with everything they had. 5 minutes after noticing the first smoke. 5 minutes for Arthur to use the TNT to destroy the bridge and escape. Wehrmath moved out during the night, braving a jungle that even in the day was considered dangerous by most American soldiers. Undetected, he slipped behind enemy lines and around 10 a.m. started spreading gasoline against the walls of the huts, where Japanese soldiers were still soundly asleep. Done with the first step of the plan, Arthur lit a match and started the fire. His path to the bridge was immediately blocked by Japanese soldiers, frantically searching for whoever was attacking them. Panic was spreading in the village as the fire kept devouring the highly flammable huts and those unlucky enough to be trapped inside. Knowing he barely had 4 minutes left to do his job, Wehrmath chose to run into the light. Immediately, gunfire erupted, while more and more Japanese soldiers noticed the lonely man running. Wehrmath was hit in the leg, but did not stop, as the familiar whistle of friendly artillery crept into the air. Time was up. He was going to set the explosives or die trying. When Wehrmath emerged from the jungle, searching for a friendly doctor, he did it leaving the bridge blown up and at least 300 Japanese soldiers burnt to death or blown up by artillery. The legend of the one-man army of Bataan had begun. Actions like this one quickly became routine for Arthur Wehrmath, earning him the attention of the American military press. When the whole country was gripped in fear of what happened to their fathers, brothers, and sons stuck on a distant island, reading about Wehrmath's adventurous successes was refreshing. The nickname One-Man Army became a flicker of hope in a sea of continuous bad news coming from the entire Bataan Peninsula. When the press reported Wehrmath had 116 absolutely accounted kills and an untold number of captures, Colonel Royal Page Davidson, superintendent at Northwestern, commented with pride, quote, "Is that all? He'll have to do better than that." He was right. The one-man army campaign had just begun. The Unrelenting Scouts. After the war, Wehrmath claimed most of his success should be attributed to his men, his Filipino band of brothers, and there's more than enough reason to say he wasn't just being humble. On the night of January the 11th, barely 2 days after Wehrmath's suicidal bridge destruction, Arthur's 57th Philippine Scouts fought head-to-head against a massive Japanese attack. The one-man army was tough, refused to ever stop or retreat, and he taught his men to do the same. Narcisco Salbadin, a Filipino soldier, faced the assault behind his machine gun, firing until the weapon jammed. then switching to his pistol until a Japanese bayonet severed his thumb, finally killing the man who wounded him by turning his weapon against him and stabbing him in the chest. In a war where the Japanese Imperial Army was doing everything they could to terrorize and demoralize, Arthur Wearmouth's scouts bit back hard. While some of Wearmouth's actions were performed in complete solitude, he actually allowed at least one man to follow him, Sergeant Crispin Jacob, nicknamed Jock. Jock was a tall, dark-skinned Filipino, part of the same troops Arthur had helped train in the months before the battle. The two became friends, and while the Ghost of Bataan was more than happy to go into the jungle alone for his suicidal attacks, Jock more than often chose to follow and back him up. There's no doubt that Jock's presence was often the only thing standing between Wearmouth and certain death. While the one-man army rarely makes mistakes, no one is perfect, especially in a conflict as lethal as the Pacific War. When Wearmouth was first wounded again, shot by an unexpected Japanese survivor while searching for wire traps, he only survived because of Jock's absolute determination to follow him. The gigantic Filipino warrior threw himself on the two enemies, dispatched them with ease, and tended to Arthur's wound, ensuring the one-man army would fight another day. Ghost on the hunt. Mission after mission, Wearmouth kept sneaking into enemy territory, waiting for a chance to deal the maximum amount of damage. At home, he was known as a football player, capable of seizing opportunity every time he saw it. And war was no different. During one of his escapades past the Japanese line, shrouded by the night, a patrol almost stepped on him while he was hiding in the deep jungle. Wearmouth didn't panic, but instead chose to join the enemy squad, just walking behind them like he was supposed to be there. The darkness was so deep, no one noticed, and he even shushed them when one of them made too much noise. When the infiltrated Japanese squad reached the American defenses, Wearmouth was elated to notice that they were about to face his own men, the Filipino scouts. He moved fast in order to avoid getting caught in the crossfire, and faked stumbling against a Japanese soldier, leaving a live grenade ready to explode. The grenade exploded, and Arthur disappeared, like he was never there to begin with. Wearmouth didn't just leave it to deal damage though. It was a signal, and his trusted scouts immediately sprung into action, cutting down the now exposed remaining Japanese men. On many occasions, Wearmouth was known to emerge from the jungle, with his Thompson machine gun aimed, cut down a Japanese squad, and disappear a moment later. His attacks were constant, relentless, and slowed down the Japanese advance, giving some breathing space to the collapsing Allied troops. Unfortunately, a single man, even surrounded by his trusted soldiers, can't bend war to his will. The peninsula of Bataan was closed off and surrounded. With no help coming, defeat was inevitable. It was late March, almost the end of the Battle of Bataan, when the high-stakes game played by Wearmouth came back to bite him. He volunteered for yet another suicide mission, the recapture of Mount Pukat, and marched out with his men, themselves volunteering to fight alongside their commander. They advanced into hell, being ambushed by hiding Japanese soldiers along the way, and were finally repelled with heavy casualties. Exhausted and reduced in numbers, the suicide snipers kept going, and a few days later were exposed to Japanese fire while crossing a stream. Wearmouth was hit while throwing a grenade, shot through the lung, and chipping a rib in the process. The one-man army was wounded multiple times during his reign of terror, but this time he needed serious medical attention. He was transported back to camp and into a field hospital, where he slept for days. Hostile captivity. When the Bataan Peninsula fell, Wearmouth woke up already captured and became a prisoner of war alongside thousands of his comrades. His wounds saved him from being thrown into the infamous Bataan Death March, where the captured Allied soldiers were forced into a lethal jungle trek with little to no supplies, under the cruel yoke of Japanese forces torturing them. Wormuth spent almost a year in charge of around 500 other POWs, building and maintaining Japanese airstrips. Not only did he lead his new men into a campaign of sabotage, subtle enough not to have them shot by their captors, but he was able to make life not too horrible in the camp. Elliot Juna Smelser, one of his fellow captives, said, "The first year of my captivity, I worked on building an airfield for the Japanese. Life was not bad, because they were afraid of the major in charge. His name was Major Wormuth, and the Japanese called him Wormuth the Lion. Even in chains, the ghost of Bataan was scary enough to protect himself and those around him." After being transferred from his prison camp, Wormuth spent time on the terrifying Japanese prison hell ship, the Oryoku Maru, until it was bombed and sunk by American aircrafts, who thought they were hitting an enemy military transport. After surviving this last ordeal, while Wormuth was locked up in a prison in Korea, his status was changed from missing in action to killed. No one thought he could still be alive. The ghost of Bataan remained true to his name, re-emerging to life in the eyes of the Allies when Japan surrendered and their prisoners were freed. He was awarded both the Silver Star and the Distinguished Service Cross, an honor reserved for the most heroic displays of courage in battle. He lived the rest of his life as a war hero and never stopped praising the Filipino men who fought alongside him. He was one of, if not the most deadly American soldier of World War II, a true one-man army.